Welcome to week 4 of the Lux Pogcast. This week we are going to be having a sit down and kind of going over how we do raid planning, kind of some war stories from raiding, and all the things relevant to that. Before we get overly started with this, I do want to thank some people who've helped us in the past, especially this tier. Um, Shout out to Rocky and Eland, who both have contributed to the guild success and our raid team success throughout this entire tier. We do appreciate it, and we hope you guys listen in, and so that we can give you thanks for that. This week we have with us Devil and Conan and Sav and our friend Doomtrain, and we're going to be going over some different things for you guys. How you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Oh, you know.
Another day in the life of a washing machine.
Basking in the glory of 10 of 12.
Yeah, it's a great week for Lux as as a guild. I think the Tuesday raid, I actually didn't make it, and I've gotten like rave reviews from everybody who went, saying that it was just like one of the most clean weeks and very, very well led. So shout out to Juve and gang for that. Maybe I should stop going to those things.
Yeah, we don't need you. Maybe we should bring him in for the Mythic team.
Benchcaster.
Bench myself. Outside of that, we also had our raid team, BFI. We've been extremely successful in the last 2 weeks. We've got the Rodden kill down and Ilganath, and I think it was like 19th pull we got it, and I think Sav, you were saying guilds average something in the 70s for that.
Yeah, so US, I actually, my statistics were wrong. US average for Ilganath was 74 pulls, and Rodden was like 67. We did Rodden in 32 and Ilganath in 19.
Let's go.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Defying the odds.
So we'll start today. Let's kind of ask everybody about their raid experience. Tell me a little bit about when you started playing, when you started raiding, not necessarily when you started playing, or both, whatever. So we'll start with Devil.
Sure. So I started the game in Burning Crusade, but never really. I came in right as that expansion was ending, so I didn't really get any of those raids, and was playing a Pally tank for a relatively small guild. We were doing kind of 10-man raids, and our goal through Wrath was ultimately to down 10-man, which I think we did like 5 weeks before, but that was just a heck of a thing. And I loved Pally Tank. Back in the day, we were mostly kind of off tanks, add tanks, so a very different perspective of what we've been playing now. But loved the game for a while, and then it fell off as Pandas came in. I just couldn't get to the Pandas, so came back for BFA. Always rating's just the part of the game that I like the most. I don't really get into the sort of questing grind stuff, and until very recently wasn't into M+. And so was playing around first Chamois through the first couple tiers. Actually got picked up by Dan on a random invite one day as I was kind of pugging around for looking for raid slots, and raided with Lux since then. So it's been fun.
And just for a little Easter egg, we actually do have a figurine here of Devil's Paladin tank head knocker from back in the day. Obviously, those listening on Spotify will not see this, but check out the YouTube link, and you'll get to see this beautiful, beautiful statue.
I want one of those really badly.
Yeah, me too. I'm not gonna lie.
That's awesome.
I do. What about you?
Well, I started back in vanilla. I was a warrior, leveled an arms warrior, back when you had to, pull one mob, sit down, eat food, get back to full health, pull another mob. Actually remember the first time that I ever got ganked. I'll never forget it in the wetlands, level 20. Sitting down, eating my food in between pulls, and rogue pops out of nowhere, undead, level 60, one shot, laughs at me and disappears. Still bitter about that. But around level 35, I was in, I think, Maradon, and our tank left, and we picked up another DPS, and I said, you know what, I'll tank. Took out my my two-handed sword, and one of the guys looks at me and goes, yo, where's your shield? And I was like, do I need a shield to tank? And then he left. So then I learned how to tank, and around 60, it was hard to get into pugs. So I had a guild of like 4 or 5 people, and found a friend who had a guild of like 16 people, and they were they were struggling to get 20 people for ZG. So I convinced them to merge, and under my leadership, I think we got like 4 or 5 bosses down before things kind of fell apart. But that's what got me into raiding.
You kind of joined in with me due to a case of mistaken identity, if that counts for anything. So Doom Train has had the name Doom Train for as long as I can remember, or some variation of Doom Choo Choo, Doom something. And I had another friend who was a Big Daddy Doom. And for I think the first 4 to 6 months after a mutual friend had put Doom into our guild, I would randomly whisper him and yell "Pop Pop," which was the other guy's nickname, and he would never whisper me back. And I eventually caught on that they were 2 different people, and I was certain that he thought I was insane.
I was confused. I was really confused. I was just like, okay, I'm not quite sure where this is going, but I'm just gonna let that one go.
I guess you're Pop Pop now, so.
Well, Pop Pop's actually raiding with the heroic team. I actually saw them in the same place at the same time for the first time ever last what was it, 2 weeks ago? Blew my
Yeah.
mind. All right, Sad,
Actually,
what about you?
randomly. Go ahead.
Definitely not as experienced as all you nerds. So I actually I started the game in Mists of Pandaria. Played for maybe 4 months, super casually. Never set foot in a raid. Maybe did 3 dungeons, right? Um, you know, didn't have a computer for a couple of years that could run WoW, so I didn't play. Eventually, I was getting tired of the games I was playing, and BFA had kind of come out a few months prior, so I resubscribed, picked up BFA, started playing, leveled my Paladin and my Demon Hunter were my first 2 characters. And jumped into Uldir pretty close to the end of the tier with about maybe a month left. Started raiding normal. Pretty long, weird trip through BFA in terms of guilds and things like that. But ultimately, I ended up in Happy Accidents in BOD. We did, really well in BOD. We got our AOTC. Struggled a little bit in Crucible. Ended up getting Crucible AOTC near the end of the tier with some trials. And then, when things fell apart there, we all came over to Lux, and basically we went from the 30-man heroic raids we were doing at the start to Mythic pretty quick. And since I'm pretty sure we can mark that date as like July 7th or 15th or something of last year, we've basically raided Mythic every week since. So that's, not as much raid experience, but I've been put through the gauntlet.
I want to backtrack a second because Doom was about to tell me I'm pretty sure about a Doom and Doom interaction.
Oh yeah, well, no, it's funny because right before he rejoined us for the heroic clear, I went into a BG, and this dude looks at me and goes, "Doom." I'm like, "Yeah," and it's like, "It's Cankle from KJ," and I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Caster, you know Cankle?" And he's like, "Yeah, dude, that's Pop Pop." And I was like, "Oh shit!" Just randomly ran into each other in a BG.
Stalking each other now.
Yep.
All right, Conan, go ahead.
Oh man. So I started playing back in BC, and I played on dial-up internet, and because they didn't have proper internet out in the woods, out in the farmland. So I had I started playing a paladin, and at the time, I was always wanting to play Rhett because I didn't want the responsibilities of playing a tank. And then halfway through my leveling journey, I got sick and tired of getting kicked out of groups because I was bad. And so I went with I found out that if you were a tank, you didn't have as much responsibility with damage. So I was like, cool, I'll just go do that. So went and did that, leveled up, joined a guild, got carried through a bunch of stuff that I probably shouldn't have done because I just, was nowhere near the skill level to do what I was doing. I had no idea about the game. And then I ended up this guild did that, and it was a guild of elites back on, what realm was that? Cenarius, I think. And I thought I was the big boy. I was the tank. I was the weekend tank. Every weekend I ran Karazhan. Didn't know
Only
it
on the weekends.
only on the weekends. because I was not aware of the fact that I was the tank for all of the main raiders' alts to go through Karazhan every week.
Beautiful.
And then when I didn't really start like really getting into the like heavy raiding until actually mists, I joined some friends from high school and joined their server, started and then after they had stopped playing, hopped around and then started really with Throne of Thunder. Throne of Thunder, favorite raid by far. Fights were amazing. Playing a prop paladin, vengeance tanking prop paladin in Throne of Thunder, best time ever. Can't change my mind. That's pretty much it.
All right. So I started playing in probably probably around the middle of Wrath. I started playing with, I think a couple of you guys know, Lex, who was my roommate at the time, and we leveled up together. We joined this guild called Bushido, and he was like their favorite, right? He was like this warlock, and he was really good. And I was playing this this red paladin, and I had no idea what I was doing, and it turned out that they had no idea what they were doing either. So they would put their melees in like just the worst positions for fights. So like where you'd spend the entire fight like on Jiraxis, the ad that's supposed to be tanked next to the boss and kind of cleaved. Their strategy was to have the melee literally chase this thing around the room in a circle like a Benny Hill clip, and then they would kick the melee out for having low DPS because they were DPSing on the run the whole time and only on one target. So I left there and joined in with another guild, and they put me into TOGC 25, which I cleared on the first day, which I remember the Bushido people being insanely jealous of. And I got like the cool pole arm. Like they treated me really well, right? Like I had no idea what I was doing, but it was a lot of fun. Shortly thereafter is kind of where I met Chumpo, who most people know. And he basically taught me how to play the game. I switched over to a mage. And through him, I kind of met Mariko and the gang over there, and kind of took over the raid lead responsibilities there. And since then, I've been pretty much just rolling with a odd crew of people I've picked up along the way. Obviously you guys now. Doom about halfway through the trip. Chumpo's been with me the whole time. Mike's been with me the whole time, and we've just been running guilds and raid leading and killing bosses. I think I have almost every major raid achievement from probably right before Kata to now.
I realized in the way back mission, I want to do a shout out to old Tank Spot, because that was the bee's knees back in the day.
And while we're doing callbacks too, I actually wanted to add in another person I wanted to thank for this tier, which was Solbrick. Solbrick was very helpful to us this time, and I'd want to make sure I squeeze that in somewhere, and others too. One Ton, Ebony, and everybody else who's been with us. I didn't mean to leave you out of the intro part there, but I do want to get that in while we can. So moving on though, we're gonna just kind of talk about what we look for with raid team members, right? Like not only so much for some of us who do some of our recruiting and some of our raid planning, but also like the people you like to raid with. Like what kind of person do you want to raid with? And I think we'll start with Doom.
Well, I want to start with a shout out to our current team. I think that we have a really amazing team. With everybody I've played with in the past and all the new people, it's just a really cohesive group, really good at communicating ideas, and just a lot of fun to play with. So just look for people who think about the game in different ways and are committed to showing up and contributing, and I think that again that we have that in our current team.
And Devil.
Sure. Yeah, like in terms of fit and function, a lot of it comes down to like how do you handle failure, right? And how do you handle learning? Because like in these raids, we're gonna wipe. We're doing progression, right? We may wipe a lot, and you get to see like how people handle feedback, how people try to give feedback, how people are frustrated, right? Some people that think they're doing it well kind of mentally turn off, which doesn't really help. So you need to worry about that. So the biggest thing is like, how do they handle that learning process? And frankly, showing up, right? Are they dependable? Are you going to be able to use them? And do you like being there? And that balance that's fine between, like, you really want to move through a raid pretty quickly so you don't have lots of downtime, but you also like want to be around people that you like. So how do you work in the good dialogue and the chat? That I agree with Doom. Like, we've got a good group right now, but we burn through trash. We burn through the bosses. We don't spend a lot of time, uh, debating stuff, right? And we almost never have folks that either get feel singled out or feel like they're like attacking things. Like, that's just it can get really toxic really fast.
Yeah, Sav.
Well, honestly, I think along the lines of what you guys are saying is pretty much my own opinion as well. Make sure the group is cohesive. I mean, like, the people that we look for when we're looking to bring in have always been like people with positive attitudes. I think Devil's 100% right. How you handle failure is such a big thing in Mythic rating because, like, I mean, it's been said by, I'm sure, tons of people in the past, but there's a huge difference between someone who is a very good farm raider and a very good progression raider. And those two things are very, very different. A farm raider might might still be able to do the same numbers as a progression raider, but if you can't learn from your mistakes and your failures and the mechanics you failed, then it's ultimately going to harm the progression of the group. And I think that, like, what we've hit with the group right now is a group of very like-minded people who work well together, that I think, like, in terms of progression, once a plan is laid out, we're very good at, like, taking the steps necessary to adapt and learn to those plans, or learn those plans. And you can see it in, like, sort of like our wipe counts once a plan was laid forward on Raden. Like, there's a reason guilds take double the number of pulls we did to kill it. We went in with a plan, and we took the time to learn it, and we executed that plan, and we succeeded. And the same thing with Il'gynoth, right? Took us a while to figure out what we wanted to do for that fight, but once we did, it was just a matter of learning it and executing it, and then it was dead. And I think that's something, like, if looking for new people to bring in the future and things like that, someone who can obviously learn from their mistakes is probably, like, the top priority. And also having a good attitude about wiping a ton of times, because let's face it, we've had some pretty good luck with the last couple bosses, but you take a look back at Mythic Ashbane in 8.2.
Hive Mind was almost a raid killer for us.
Yeah, Hive Mind too. Hive Mind almost broke the team, right? Like, I mean, we've had bosses that we've hit before. We've wiped 140, 200 times before we've killed it. So
Oh yeah, I've seen it happen. I know back in the day when we were progressing Heroic Ragnaros, he was literally nicknamed the Guild Breaker at the time, and I don't even know how many pools that the group I was in put into that. It had to have been what 200 pools. I know Conan was with me when we did. Oh man, which boss was that, Conan? It was terrible.
Gorfing.
Yeah, Mythic Gorfine, and that was a nightmare. I think we pulled that. You remember how many times we pulled that?
Oh man. 270 something, I believe.
And I think we killed it twice out of those.
No, that was before our first one.
Oh yeah. I think in total we ended up doing something like 400 pulls for 2 kills or something before we gave up.
Yeah. It was insane.
Yeah. Anyway, continue, Sav. Sorry.
No, I mean, I think that's about it, right? Like, have a good attitude about failure, because, like, failure is only going to contribute to success in Mythic rating. And then also just, like, learn from your mistakes. Obviously capable of playing the class is a given. It's Mythic rating. And then another big thing I think that, like, I'd like to touch on is when we're looking for people to come in, being able to meet the requirements of Mythic rating, like the amount of effort that each and every one of our team members puts in, like, before a raid tier, is, like, it's insane. Like, the people go above and beyond to make sure they're ready on day one of Heroic, so that we can get the easiest clear through Heroic, and then being able to clear Heroic quickly and get the gear you need, know what you need for your character, do the class research. Like, some of that stuff isn't really a huge time commitment, but it makes a massive amount of difference. Like, an hour of research into your character could translate into, 100 mistakes you don't make in the future, right? When hunting for gear or deciding what dungeons to run or what raid bosses to roll on. So all of these things factor in, I think, into like what I would consider the ideal candidate for mythic raiding.
What about you, Conan? What do you got?
Well, the kind of everything Avila said, obviously, but the other big thing, especially with our group, is being able to take constructive criticism. Like, if you're fucking up, and if you're messing up, and somebody's like, hey, I see you're doing this, maybe do it this way, or you're standing there, maybe don't stand there, try over here, or something like that in a boss pool. That's another big thing, especially when it, like, with for instance, with Devil and Brooke. When Brooke came in, like, he was doing good damage, but then after Devil kind of sat down and coached him on the ways of Demon, the Brooke's damage skyrocketed, and then even though he doesn't want to admit it, Brooke beat him in damage on a few pulls.
He did. He beat me in damage on Il'gynoth, actually.
Yeah. So, but stuff like that, like,
and does his own research. Like he picked up the Imp Dispel, right?
Yeah.
So like it's the
Yeah, it's like, a lot of the players that we have can do a lot of different classes and play a lot of different things. And if we're reaching out to you to, to trying to, like, inform you on something, there's a good chance that what we're saying might actually, be better. I mean, there's a chance it might not either, but we're never trying to maliciously, kill your parse because we want to parse higher than you type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually never discussed ever, is parsing. That's one thing too that I think people lose track of, is parsing is never in the discussion. Like, if you parse 9, like if I parse in gray and the boss is dead, I'm totally happy with that. Like, I don't even care. But to expand a little bit on kind of what everybody else was saying and look at it as like a little bit broader of a view, right? So like Sav and I and Conan to an extent too, we do a lot of just like general raid recruiting for the guild, like even for the heroic team. And I kind of look for the same things for both teams, right? Like, so initially, like I try to make a point of contact with somebody, and I kind of try to check out their attitude and kind of get a feel for like if they're able to work in a team environment, right? Because like raiding in this game is a team sport, right? It's just like being on a baseball team or a football team or whatever, because unless it's old content, you're not going in somewhere by yourself. And you're going to be totally reliant on all the other people who are around you, right? Like, you can't just go in as a tank in fresh content and kill it, and same with heal it or DPS it down. So you got to have people who are like able to like work together and understand that they are fulfilling a specific role, and understand that like they have a job that they're kind of assigned to, and to worry about their job and let other people worry about their part, right? And if everybody's doing their part, you just kind of, it all just comes together in the end. And then there's a couple of other things I always look at too. Obviously, like your basic stuff, like can you play the class? And it's for whatever level of content you're doing, whether that's recruiting for mythic or heroic. If you're willing to take help, or just work on things, look into things on your own, not be too proud or stubborn to ask for help if you think you need it. As Conan mentioned, constructive criticism. But more really, the most important thing to me has always just been the raider attitude, right? Like, you can fix positioning, and you can fix mechanic issues and that sort of thing. You just can't fix a person, right? Like, that's a lot harder to do, and that's more of like a personal, in real life kind of thing. That's way out of my pay grade, unfortunately. So, I just look for people that I know that we can, work with and do things with. And, there's sometimes there's some real good finds out there, and sometimes there's some really bad ones. I remember doing BOD, and we were on Cho'Gall, and hunters are responsible for the ads coming down the stairs. and they just kept going down and going down and going down. We kept wiping and wiping and wiping, and I think for 2 or 3 hours we were telling the hunter we had, like, hey man, you got to use your trap, you can use it at the stairs. And we found out, probably at the end of the raid, the guy's trying to trap the boss. Like, he's gonna steal his loot. Like, he's gonna frost trap Cho'Gall, and we're gonna pickpocket him and run out with the loot. Like,
Hey,
and
if
that's
it
just the
works.
sort of thing you can't. Yeah, well, yeah, if it works,
But
but
it don't work that way though.
right. And it's just stuff like that. It's basic following directions, and obviously doing a minute or two of research. Like, if you pop on that video and watched it for 3 or 4 minutes, or done really any raid boss, right? Like, with any sort of trial and error, you pretty much figure out that you can't frost trap the boss. Although I do applaud his effort to do so.
And I mean,
Actually, in the questions I sometimes get that are misperceptions, like we don't probably spend that much more time than the average person grinding, right? So it's we are not generally min-maxing as, right? I mean, some of us do during like certain phases and stuff like that, but the time we may spend is much more like what Sav was talking about, that extra hour of research, than another 5 hours grinding to get the neck up to Azerite level 96 or stuff like that. I mean, that it's one thing to not be 20 or 30 tiers behind or something like that, but within a range of acceptable, it isn't really about super big grinding.
yeah, like a good example is what I did throughout the course of 8.3. I mean, going into 8.3, I researched like what the rewards for everything were and how to basically get to the point where I needed to be to raid Mythic. And given the state of the game, I wasn't super thrilled about having to do all these new dailies, so I basically picked and prodded and decided what was necessary to do, and that little bit of research that I did saved me probably like hundreds of hours of gameplay doing stuff that someone who wants to do absolutely everything would have to do. So sometimes this little bit of research can save you time.
Well, that's the thing too, right? Like, I mean, there is a little bit of grinding to an extent to, like, if you're doing higher end content. Like, obviously at the start of tiers, you're pushing keys as high as you can go immediately, and doing that extra little bit just to try to get the leg up, I guess, on your average person who just maybe it doesn't have the time or the desire to maybe push that hard or that far. But it kind of comes with the territory, right? Like, it's if you're trying to push to do as much content as you possibly can, you usually have to front load a little bit of extra effort. But at the end of the day, you end up, kind of getting that time back at the end, right? Because if you get really, really kind of set up in the first, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks of a new tier or at the start of an expansion, it lets you kind of go further in that tier of that expansion, right? So you can kind of get into like doing mythic or farming out heroic, depending on your kind of your goal. But the more of that you do, the better you go into the following tier, right? So it's the less stuff you have to do, right? So like we a good example was we farmed out EP through about halfway through Mythic. And then when Nyalotha came out, we are already out gearing heroic. So that's, a whole normal that we don't have to do. And we are already wearing essentially gear that out gears heroic for the current tier. And that's less grinding you have to do. It lets you get through the content faster, and that's, a little less research. You can kind of let your gear carry a little bit at that point, and it makes things run a little more efficiently. Like, it's kind of the name of the game is you put it all kind of in at once, and then just kind of maintain the basic levels of research beyond that point.
Yeah, like one of the other things, like, it's kind of goes back to beginning of the expansions with Shadowlands coming out soon. It's the same group that we've done for the past few expansions, at least for Caster, Me, and Doom. Is we're gonna, at the beginning of the expansion, a few of us are probably going to be max within like the first 3 days, and then after that, it's just going to be nosediving into like all the different systems, gaining as much essence, anima, whatever they're calling it,
Anime.
and then pretty much. Yeah, the anime. Then when Mythic Plus drops, you're going to see me, Caster, Mike, Chumpo, Doomtrain. Like, you're going to see a decent amount of us doing nothing but just chain running Mythic Pluses all day, every day. It's not going to be a surprise if you see us playing, log off, go to bed, wake up, and we're still doing Mythic Pluses. Like, historically you've done like 14-hour play sessions of just nothing but running Mythic Pluses at beginning of an expansion.
Well,
Just
yeah.
to get that, like, just to get ahead, to get ready for that first for the first week of like of heroic and mythic and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, it's that and it's a combination of that and the nightmare that is raid planning for a new expansion.
That too.
Because there's just no information, right? Like, that's my favorite, is at the start of a new expansion. Okay, I'm gonna go look at the raid testing videos, and you get 2/3 of the way through, and somebody's like, "Well, there's another phase to this fight, but we never saw it. The boss just stopped attacking." So
And it
you just have to,
despawned.
you just have to figure that part out when you get there. And there's no real guide for it. Like, there's no, I just make little flashcards at the start, and I'm like, these are what we're using, and we'll figure it out from there. And that's just kind of where the teamwork comes in. It's just, okay, well, I noticed this. Okay, cool. So what do you guys want to do about it? By the second tiers and stuff, things are a little bit more fleshed out, and you can kind of run through it with a little bit more gear. But the start of an expansion is an absolute raid planning nightmare, especially if you're real meticulous with things. Like, we were talking before this that we have a healer Holy, and on his stream you can hear him counting out loud for like popping his cooldowns and stuff. Like, he'll talk to himself. It's actually really interesting to kind of listen to sometimes. But like, nightmare fuel for a guy like that, right? Like, when you don't know the exact timer because nobody's done the fights enough to actually make any sort of guide for you, is that's just it's tough sometimes. Like, you don't know when to blow your cooldowns, you don't know where you're supposed to be standing and when. But it's also kind of the allure of new expansion, right? Like, is that unknown that's kind of the fun part.
Yeah, it's like with I can't remember the boss it was for this expansion in Old Deer. We there was the raid testing from beta that a bunch of us watched, and then when we got to the boss, we were looking at all the raid. We were looking at all because nobody had posted a kill video yet or anything like that. So we were looking at the beta test video, and it's always the disclaimer of, well, it may ship like this, it may not. Things will probably change, numbers will probably change, and stuff like that. But one of the bosses, we get there, and the entire boss fight is different. Like, it was the bug boss, I believe, from Old Deer. What was that boss called?
Talking about the big purple guy,
Zekvaz.
Sekvoz, yeah.
Yeah, his boss fight was entirely different from the beta test footage that we watched. So when we got there, we're like, well, all right, throw the notes out the window. Guess we're just gonna have to go with this on the fly.
I guess we'll die.
Yes, well, that we did.
Yeah, we did a
did
lot.
die.
A lot of die.
And there's one other thing I will add to this, because I do want to, and I've stressed this millions of times. I know Conan's heard me say this a lot of times, and I think Sav maybe once or twice, and Doom's probably heard this a bunch of times. If you're going to want to join a raid team, your best ability is availability. You got to be there and be available and ready to rock and roll. I can never stress that enough. There's nothing more frustrating from a raid lead perspective than somebody who's, there every other raid or every 2 weeks, unless obviously like your raid's built for something like that. I mean, like, our heroic team sometimes is kind of built that way, but actually we're seeing a lot more consistency with that now, which is really, really nice. And you're starting to actually kind of see that attendance kind of put together a faster clears and a little bit more cohesion and stuff, and it's really nice to see. But if you want to raid, and I get asked that all the time, like, how do I get in the raids? You got to be there and be available. That's the main thing I can't stress more than anything else.
Yeah, the stark contrast between like raid attendance in 8.2 to 8.3, and then like the progress we've made in terms of how different those raid tiers went. You can kind of see the difference with like when we have 19 to 20 people who are there almost every week. Well, we're progressing relatively quickly into the tier, and then like, you know, when we had to spend 2 months with like 3 or 4 people down in 8.2, well, we just lost all progress.
Yeah, I mean, not to discount some of the extremely wild reasons I've heard of people missing raids, though. You know, I've had a raider message me 10 minutes before raid started to tell me that they had like a Bic pen, and they were one eye closed, one eye looking through the hole at the other end of it, and poked themselves in the eye and couldn't make raid. That's been an actual thing.
Gouged your eye out with a Bic pen. Can't raid. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
To be fair, if I stab myself in the eye with a Bic pen, I wouldn't raid either. I'm not gonna blame that person. That sounds like a legitimate reason to not raid.
I wasn't.
pokes
I
themselves in
wasn't.
the eye?
Well, I wasn't there for it, but then there was also the time that Lex tripped over his cat.
Oh, I was
Yeah.
there for that. That was great.
That was frightening too, because
Actually,
like
yeah, because he like went down the stairs, right?
yeah, he got a concussion from that actually, and we were still roommates like right before then. So he's like one of my closest friends. So like it was kind of funny in like a raid sense because you're like, man, this guy tripped over a cat and like totally gonna miss the raid. But at the same time, I'm like, should I drive to his house and like make sure he's okay?
Don't go to sleep, man. Don't go to sleep.
Right. All right, so we'll move on to kind of the process that I know that we use, and I'm actually gonna kind of put Doom on the spot here first for this. I kind of want from the outside of like because me and Conan and Devil, um, and again with the help of other people throughout the tier, we kind of have chats and sit in the seedy hidden chat channels and message each other throughout the day. I mean, I'm talking 50 to 75 messages a day. Sometimes raid relevant, sometimes not.
I woke up one night and there
Planning
was
for stuff.
275 messages.
Were they relevant?
Yeah, actually, it was.
Oh, that's impressive. Go us. But from an outside perspective, like looking, at kind of, what we show up to raids with, what do you what are your expectations, or you feel like the group's expectations of what we're supposed to show up with and kind of what you see and what you actually get?
I mean, kind of expect a plan and an understanding of the fight and the roles that we have and the people we have and who can handle what and who's more mechanically inclined and who's more blasting inclined. You guys always come through with solid strategies. You adapt the plan as we progress on the fight really well. You take feedback and you sit with it, and you can tell that you guys are discussing things and really working through and that you have a process to strategizing and to adapting to the fights.
Yeah, and we kind of have kind of our own roles that we all kind of like molded into. Devil, you want to kind of talk about what it is that you do for your research going into the fights and how you kind of often translate that for things that we can do as a raid team?
Sure. So, I mean, usually we kind of have the outline of the approach. So to like use Raw Den as an example, we were pretty sure we were going to go do a 2-orb strat, right? So, my I kind of have 3 different things that I do to try to dig into that. One is, so given our strat, let's go find like Warcraft logs of other guilds that have used that strat and specifically look at less the damage and the specific cast order, though a little bit that, but the replay function in Warcraft logs, and just sort of see how movement and cluster was, right? There's, even better than videos is just to get that real time as the fight goes on. What were people doing? How did it all kind of come together? Just to kind of get a feel for how do things group up in a practical way. Then I try to just go through and frankly find videos, right? And like try to find, there weren't that many 2-orb videos that were kind of in our range for Rod N, but try to make sure, because a lot of people learn that way and it's easier to see. And then lastly, frankly, I've not been shy at reaching out to kind of some of the higher end raiders and just asking them for pointers, right? I mean, like named folks I found have generally been really nice. Like I reached out to like Little Dammy, who's kind of the number 1, number 2 warlock and popped up corn tart, or I always think I reverse those 2 things, but one of those, like that guild, the Dratnos,
Pop-Tart corn dog.
something like that. Yeah, one of
Yeah.
those. And or Selly over in Pieces, who's pretty consistently kind of a top 3, top 4 guild in the world, and they just come back really with nice practical advice. So like the example on Raden from Selly was basically put Vita in your first cycle, right? Just because it's a harder mechanic than Void, and if you're going to wipe fast because it keeps your cycle time down. Right. So, it's not the most arcane kind of advice, but by reaching out to the small number of people, particularly to Caster's point early in that tier, that just go, look, here's how we approached it. It may not always work for the strat that we use, because that's very strat dependent, but often I can feed them our strat and they'll be like, oh, you should probably think about this. And then obviously the warlock specific stuff, like, or should we go Destro on this? Should we go big single target? And kind of putting Brooke and I in is our job to be boss damage on this, add cleanup, and kind of having a class specific strat, either for, where do we want portals? Where do we want demonic circles? Where do we what are we kind of going in, and what is our role for this particular fight?
Yeah, and actually we ended up using that orb advice. I mean, we theoretically could have done it in an easier combination of things, but it actually kind of worked out because it was, use the 2 mechanics together might be the hardest set that you can do at once.
But
They're also but you're doing it first, and they're also the 2 that aren't a new mechanic. So you only have to do that new mechanic one time. So you only have to learn something new once, and you can do the familiar stuff even if it's harder, but it's familiar. And what about you, Sav? I know you spend quite a bit of time arguing with me about things.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what? It's probably good to have some opposition sometimes. Most of the time it just devolves into like screeching, but it's probably a good thing because, like, in doing so, we figure out usually half a dozen ways not to try to fight a boss, which is, ruling it out, like, as opposed to throwing random strats at it and seeing what's going to stick. At least we figure out what's not going to stick early. So yeah, arguing with you is probably one of the contributing factors. But no, I to prepare for raid bosses, I do a lot of like preliminary planning. Sometimes like a boss or 2 ahead of time. So generally, that like one thing that I can say that I bring to the table is like I generally don't try to make a decision on what strat is better. I just dredge information on all the available strats if I can. And that sort of gives us a couple of different perspectives, which again does, like Caster said, usually end up with the 2 of us arguing about one point or another. But having all the different acceptable strategies for progressing a boss in front of you does give you a couple of different options on how to do it, right? And so yeah, a lot of what I do is dredging information. I use things like Warcraft logs, primarily, I think would be the number 1 source, because as good as some strategy videos and strategy guides are, a lot of them were written and made in like February, March, April, like, and obviously because of the systems that we have right now and the player power increase that came from the corruption vendor, some of those strategies either aren't necessary or are outdated, and there's just better ways to tackle bosses. Like, I'm sure in April nobody was talking about 2 orb phasing Raden, right? Whereas like today, it's like very achievable. And same as Il'gynoth, right? Like, there was a nerf, and the generally accepted strategy was not to dispel any of the debuffs, but with the nerf, it makes it much more manageable to treat the fight like a normal Raden heroic fight, or sorry, Il'gynoth heroic fight, and actually dispel the debuffs. So I mean, those are things that, like, when I'm dredging for information and like looking at Warcraft logs and looking at Reddit, and like one resource that I really think anybody who wants to do a little bit of research into fights could use, the subreddit r/competitive WoW is really good. I've actually gone on and asked questions about progression fights and gotten very reasonable, helpful answers. There's a lot of like like top 50 guild raiders who actually post in there, and like you can recognize their handle. And when you have one of those guys coming in to answer your question, at least you know it's coming from a place of knowledge. And yeah, and other than that, I mean, talking to people who've already killed the boss, again, shout out to Eland, helps a lot sometimes when we're taking a look at the boss for the first time. Don't always use his advice, but but it always works out.
He did suggest dying many more times than we actually did, so
that is, yeah. Like I said, he's not always right, but at the end of the day, it's helpful, right, to have people to bounce ideas off of. And like the class specific side of it, like how I prepare myself for raids, I actually generally use like resources like the class Discord. After keeping an eye on the Paladin Discord for as long as I have, I've seen a few people on there who post a lot that are in CE guilds, and those are people that like I'll reach out to sometime, kind of like how Devil reaches out to some of the top warlocks. Shoot him a message, just be like, hey, I noticed you guys killed this boss. What did you do for Rhett on that boss? Like, is there anything that I could do to like try a different build or have a different approach? Positioning wise, is there something I should be aware of, like, early on in the fight, later on in the fight? People like that are helpful to help you with the class specific stuff. But in terms of raid planning, yeah, I'm like dredging the internet for information.
Yeah, and it does help. Like, I know Eland has been a really big help to us this tier. We've been roasting him the last couple of days just because we've been kind of very lucky. But a lot of the good things that we've done, actually, he's kind of helped advise a little bit on. And like you said, we haven't used it every time, but it's been helpful to know going into things. And other resources from other people too, which has been really nice, including our own. Just like, I get contribution from our raiders in general. Holy messages me, or I message him, or something usually happens between us. If he's got an idea, he usually reaches out. And on the healing side, because none of us are healers, so I kind of bank on him and Mariko, right? Because they're the ones that gotta do that job, and they do an outstanding job of it, actually. But cooldown wise and that sort of thing, we're a lot of times just hoping that they know what they're doing and got a plan, and we've been really fortunate with what they do as far as planning goes. And then we'll turn it over to Conan, who's pretty much our residential bookkeeper, if you want to kind of explain your role and how we do raid planning.
So, I mean, you would think that as the only tank that I would do a little bit more when it comes to strategizing for tanks, but usually all I do is I watch like 2 videos and then just let them decide, let you guys decide what we're actually going to do, and then I'll just like, me and Avery will just work around it. Me and Avery surprisingly talk very little about strategies. We just kind of ad hoc it every single time. But other than that, like, I do a lot of like the spreadsheets. Anybody who's talked to me about like, what I do in the guild, everybody knows that I love spreadsheets. It's not a at first it wasn't a choice. It was pushed upon me by the great Caster Blaster. And then I just became to like I became to like it. The other than that, I do the kill videos. Pretty much it. The depending on how fast people can get stuff back to me, though, I can usually get out a video usually like by the next day or the day after if I'm feeling like it. I've actually been slowly piecing together our Yoganath kill video, actually. But a lot of what I do other than stuff like that, though, is like I keep up like social media too. Some of them. I do a lot of the background work effectively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it pretty much keep me organized is really the big thing.
Yeah.
Especially at the start of expansions, or when we do signups to like switch classes for stuff, or like it seems small, right? Like but it's actually really important for keeping everything organized, because it's like I can go and everything's nice and color coded and auto adds everything up for me, so I can kind of at a glance look at stuff and be like, well, I don't like the way that looks. Like that's not going to work for us. Or okay, this looks great. We've got 9,000 hunters and they're good, so let's do this thing. Like it's nice. It makes it really like at a glance easy to do things.
Yeah, one of the things I'm actually going to add to some of our spreadsheets going into next
So
is
yeah,
what?
no.
What?
Did Sav activate a mic?
Maybe. um.
Technical difficulties, folks. We're gonna miss like 10 seconds of the podcast.
Hello, everyone. As I was editing this, I realized that after this, you missed a bit more than 10 seconds. The rest of the podcast was missing audio, except for Sav's mic, but the video was okay. So we will be continuing this topic of our battle stories and war stories and stuff like that on a later podcast dedicated to its own. We hope you guys will tune in then. Have a good one.